Today we're going to look at Chapter 2, Ratios, Percentages, Simple Equations, and Ratios and Proportions. A ratio is just another name for a fraction. So in order to write or to change a ratio to a fraction, you're just taking your first number, which becomes your numerator, and your second number, which becomes your denominator. And then you just simply write it numerator over denominator, which would be 3 over 35. And then you always look to see if you can cancel. Does anything go into 3 and into 35? And no, it doesn't. So that is my answer. So let's look at 4 and 7, 4 to 7. Sometimes you will look at a ratio and have the colon. Sometimes it will say, in this case, like 4 to 7. But it's the same thing. If I'm going to a fraction, still the first number is my numerator. Second number is my denominator. Same thing here. This would be my numerator. This would be my denominator. So 4 to 7 is written as 4 over 7. And again, make sure it's in simplest form. Reduce where necessary. Nothing goes into 4 or 7 and 7. So it's simplified. Now, number 3 is a little more complicated because we have decimals. But I'm still going to write it as a fraction. I'm going to write it as 0.05 over 0.15. And let me erase that and try that again. Just like with writing any fraction, I don't want a decimal in the denominator. So I either need to multiply by something on top and bottom, or I need to move my decimal. I can multiply by 100. When I multiply by 100, I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to the right. So I'm going to move my numerator 2 places to the right. Whatever I move the denominator, I move to the numerator. Or whatever I multiply in the denominator, I move to the numerator. So then I'm going to write it as 5 over 15. And so now what goes into 5 and into 15? 5 goes into both of them. So I can reduce them both by 5. And I will have 1 over 3. Because 5 divided by 5 is 1. 15 divided by 5 is 3. So 1/3 is my ratio as a fraction in simplest form. Alright, now we're going to look at ratios to a decimal, and then to a percent. And we can do this a couple of different ways. I want to write it as a decimal, I want to write it as a percent. Even though these are still in decimal form, I need to find it as a fraction first. So I can change my fraction to 1 decimal. So I'm going to write it as 0.3 over 4.5. Then I'm going to get my denominator to be a whole number. So that becomes 45. And then my numerator, I'm going to move it 1 place, and I get 3. Okay, so we know why it's changing on me now. Right. What goes into 3 and into 45? Well, I know 3 goes into 3, and 3 will also go into 45. 3 goes into 3 1 time, 3 goes into 45 15 times. So that is my ratio, or that's my fraction. Now to change it to a decimal, I'm going to take my bottom number goes into my top number. So I'm going to have 15 goes into 1, and since 15 doesn't go into 1, I'm going to put a 1 and a 0. Take my decimal straight up. 15 doesn't go into 10, so I'm going to add a 0 here, add a 0 in my division. And then how many times does 15 go into 100? Now I'm going to go over here and use scratch paper and say, okay, 15, I know 15 times 3 gives me 45. So I can do 15 times, let's try 7. 7 times 5 is 35. 7 times 1 is 7. And 3 is 10. That gives me 105. So that's too much. So it has to go 6 times. So 6 times 5 is 30. Carry my 3. 6 times 1 is 6. Plus 3 is 90. And then subtract, so that means I have to borrow. And I subtract it backwards. And then that leaves me a remainder, so I'm going to add another 0. And then 15 will go into 100 again 6 times. We know that's 90. We know, or we can see at this point, that that's going to be a repeating decimal. So we're going to take, and we're going to have to round our decimal. So I'm going to take the 0.6 or 0.666. I want to round it to the thousandths place, so tens, hundreds, thousands. So that means I'm going to look at the 10,000ths place. If the 10,000ths place is 5 or greater, so 6 is greater than 5, that means I'm going to add 1 to the thousandths place. So then my decimal is 0.067. So this is my decimal part of it. And then to change our decimal to a percent, I'm going to take my decimal number, multiply it by 100. So when you're going to a percent, you're going to multiply by 100. You're going to multiply your decimal by 100. So when I multiply it by 100, I'm just moving my decimal point 2 places to the right, so I don't worry about the zeros I have in front of it, and I have 6.7%. So there's my decimal, and there's my percent. Okay, let's look at number 5. I'm going to draw a line right here trying to separate these out. So let's take our ratio, let's write it as a fraction. So I have 0.12 divided by 0.88. I want to make both of them decimal, or both of them whole numbers, change them from a whole number or decimal to a whole number. So since they're both in the hundreds place, I can move my decimal 2 places, or I can multiply by 100, and I end up with 12 over 88. Now, I always like to reduce it. That makes my number smaller, and it's easier to divide. So I know 4 goes into 12, and 4 goes into 88. So divide them both by 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 88 divided by 4 is 22. So now I can take my fraction and take 22 into 3, or 3 divided by 22. So I have 22 goes into 3, but 22 doesn't go into 3, so I put a decimal, bring my decimal straight up, and I put a 0 before it, and then I put a 0 after it. So then 22 goes into 30 one time. So 22 minus 30, gotta borrow again. So 10 minus 2 is 8. 2 minus 2 is 0, so I don't have to worry about that. But I have a remainder, so I'm going to multiply by 0, or add a 0 rather, and bring it down. 22 times, let's see, 3. If I did 22 times 3, I get 66. If I did 22 times 4, I'm going to get 88. So I don't want 88, I want the 66. So this is going to be 3. I'm going to subtract 66. So 6 and 4 is 10. 7 minus 6 is 1. And then I have a 0. And I'm going to bring it down. So that gives me 140. Okay, so then I have to look and see what is going to go. 22 times what gives me something close to 140. So I'm going to do 22 times well, no, 2 times 7 is, give me 154. Let's try 6. 6 times 2 is 12. Carry my 1. 6 times 2 is 12, and 1 is 13. So I get 132. Alright, so when I subtract, I have to borrow again. So 10 minus 2 is 8. 3 minus 3 is 0. So I want to round to the thousandths place, so I got to go out one more 0. So that 0 comes down, and I have 80. So I know that, again, I'm going to have to go with 3. And I'm going to have 66. And then borrow to subtract, and I'm going to have 14 again. But I only have to go out to the thousandths place. So my decimal is 0. If I'm rounding to the thousandths, I'm going to look at the 10 thousandths. 3, if it's 4 or less, I don't change the number. If it's 5 or greater, I change the number. 3 is less than 4, so I'm going to have 0.136, and that's my decimal. And then if I want to change my decimal to a percent, then I'm moving my decimal 2 places, and I'm going to have 13.6%. So moving it 2 places, multiplying it by 100 is the same thing. Okay, let's do number 6. That's the last one. So now I have a mixed number to a mixed number. So we're going to look at our fractions, and we're going to change each fraction to a mixed number. And, you know, if this, okay, thinking back when we did fractions, when we had our numerator over our denominator, that's the same thing as saying numerator divided by denominator. So then my ratio can also refer to as a division. So I can say that this would be 1 1/2 divided by 2 ninths. And I can't divide when they're in mixed numbers. I can only divide when they're as improper fractions. So I'm going to do 2 times 1. So change them to improper. 2 times 1 is 2 plus 1 gives me 3. So that's 3 halves divided by 6 times 9 is 54, plus 2 is 56. And then remember, when we're dividing fractions, we're going to do the keep, flip, change. So I keep the first term as 3 halves, change my division to a multiplication, and flip my second term. So I have 6 over 56. And then you can cancel them, or you can multiply straight across and then cancel. I'm going to go ahead. I know 2 goes into 2 one time. 2 goes into 6 3 times. 3 doesn't go into 56, so I can't cancel there. 3 and 3 are both on the top, so I can't cancel theirs. Now I'm just going to multiply straight across. 3 times 3 is 9. 1 times 56 is 56. So I did all that so I can change my fraction to a decimal. So I'm going to take 56 into 9. Oops, I said that. I said it right, and then I wrote it wrong. So let's try this again. So 56 goes into 9, but 56 doesn't go into 9 evenly, or at all. So I'm going to put a decimal. Decimal goes straight up. I'm going to add, since I'm going around to the thousands, I'm going to go ahead and add 4 zeros. And then put a 0 in front of my decimal. 56 will go into 90 one time. So I have 56. And then I've got to subtract. I've got to borrow. 10 minus 6 is 4. 8 minus 5 is 3. And I'll bring down my 0. And then I'm going to look, 56 goes into 340. And I'm going to say probably about 6 times. But before I multiply it out, I'm going to go up here, I'm going to scratch. And I'm going to do 56 times 6. This just makes it easier on me. 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 5 is 30, and 3 makes that 33. So I got 336. It went 6 times. So 336. And if I borrow, I get 4 left. I bring down the 0. The 56 won't go into 40, so I put a 0 here, and then I bring down this next 0. And then 56 will go into 400, I think 57, or 7 times. So if I do 56 times 7, 6 times 7 is 42. Okay, that's what I get for writing too much to the top. So it's going to go 7 times. So 7 times 6 is 42. Carry my 4. 7 times 5 is 35, and 4 is 39. So I get 392. And I'm going to subtract, so it means I got to borrow. So I get 8. So I get 8 for my remainder. Okay, so then I'm running out of room. That's why I like to change colors. So, except my number didn't change, my color didn't change. Alright, so I'm going to round to the thousandths. So I'm going to look to the 7, that's greater than 5, so I add 1 here. So my decimal, I don't know where to write this. It's going to be 0.161. To change it to a percent, remember I'm just moving this decimal 2 places to the right, so I get 16.1%. So there's my 2 answers. So my decimal and my percent. Okay, I'm going to stop this video here, and then I'll be back in a few moments, starting with chapter 7, or starting with number 7.